I think like a lot of people, I was really giving Bill the benefit of the doubt. This was not the man that I knew. This is not the man that I worked with. He may have had other faults, but he certainly was not people.
The Cosby Show changed television. It sold the image of a perfect family, spotless values, and a safe, loving home. Yet some beloved faces faded, reappeared, or left under foggy reasons. Fans asked for years, why?
He fired her for getting pregnant. He was sinister IRL. But would Denise Huxtable straight up trash her TV dad, aka Mr. Righteous?
In this video, we go past vague, creative differences into real power struggles, clashing visions, and career choices that pulled actors away from TV's most watched living room. If you thought the sweater hid the stress, think again. The departures were not accidents, they were signals, and they tell a different story about control, image, and survival in Hollywood. Image first, truth second. From the start, the show lived by a clear rule. The family on screen had to match the family in people's minds. The public story was order, kindness, and lessons wrapped in laughter. That was not only a tone, it was a brand. Every scene, joke, and sweater worked toward that brand. The idea was simple: keep it spotless and safe. Viewers should feel like they know this home and could trust it. That promise pulled in millions. It also created pressure. When the image is the product, any choice that risks that image becomes a high-stakes decision, on camera and off. Inside that promise sat a hard truth about power. A single vision guided the set, and that vision set limits. It decided how far a character could grow, how sharp a joke could be, and how real the conflict could feel. Even private choices by cast members could become part of the conversation. You were not just playing a role, you were helping uphold a model. The show's leaders wanted consistency. They believed a steady message kept fans loyal and made the series bigger than one actor or one plot. But a steady message can turn into a hard border, and borders can turn small choices into big fights. Information about the peculiar creature hidden in its mystic hairstyle, or at least to have hype on the faces about creations and natural growth. This was the press line, and it worked for a long time. But behind it, people had their goals, needs, and lives that were sometimes not in line with the brand guide. When an actor wanted to shift a persona from trying to do darker drama to letting real life show in the script, the brand line would flare red. The question, "Is this good art?" was never the only one. It was joined by, "Does this keep our image clean?" The show-toned palette thus did not act as such, but rather functioned like a fence. If any choice sat outside its boundaries, the solution generally was to move the actor, change a beat, or reframe the character. This is why the set gave off warm, tense vibrations at times. It essentially came from the working rhythm that dished out the same emotional payoffs week after week. This was because keeping this rhythm cost. Writers did pitches, holding open one ear for the audience and another for the brand. Some roads would be closed to even actors, no matter whether they are open or interesting. That was an operational economy for relapse, not surprise. It would be a good nursery, so long as everyone was aligned, but also could restrict the field for anyone wanting to stretch. The most telling moment is how friction was treated in the show. Instead of showing a mess to the viewers, the machine often chose a neater path, a way to school, a way to distant jobs, and less of. The story would adapt just enough to sustain the image. Fresh faces were brought in to rejuvenate the same promise. Younger kids walked in to reset the family energy. The themes walked safely back. Study habits, small slights, funny jokes, and a final hug. It was an elegant structure. It was also quite firm. Efficient solutions were being provided by the system, sending a message to everyone on set. Image comes first. After all, this temple-sized business could not possibly be without small gaps. The more the branding is bigger, the more it demands. And more its demands become bigger. More the choices become public testing grounds. Enter bold cinema. A life change that did not fit the mold. A creative consideration to make all these college stories feel real. The branding found its criteria there. If you stayed under it, you were safe. Once you went across it, even if for the truest of artistic reasons, the ground shook. This is not so much a taboo as it is a logic of doing business under the pressure of a big brand. One actor's choices tested the image more than any other, and the fallout started a chain reaction. Lisa Bonet. Lisa Bonet was not just another cast member. She was the heartbeat of a generation. As Denise Huxtable, she became the cool, stylish daughter who refused to fit a mold. Her wardrobe set trends, her free-spirited energy gave the family balance, and her charm made audiences feel like she was both relatable and aspirational. Denise was unpredictable in the best way, and that unpredictability resonated with fans who craved something different from the polished sitcom daughter stereotype. What viewers loved about Denise was exactly what made Bonet stand out. She embodied individuality. Yet, in a system built on a carefully guarded image, individuality had a limit. That limit was tested in 1987, when Bonet accepted a role in Angel Heart. It was a bold move. The film was nothing like the safe, family-friendly world of Thursday night TV. Instead, it was a dark, gritty psychological thriller with themes of voodoo, violence, and sexuality. Bonet's role as Epiphany Proudfoot required her to embrace vulnerability, risk, and artistic daring. For a young actress seeking to prove she was more than just a sitcom star, it was the perfect opportunity. But for the brand managers behind The Cosby Show, it was a nightmare. The role was provocative enough that the film initially received an X rating before edits scaled it back to an R. The controversy that followed had less to do with Bonet's performance. It was powerful, and more to do with how it clashed with the image she represented on television. Bill Cosby was reportedly furious at the perceived betrayal by the family brand he spent years building. In his mind, Bonet had left the Huxtable household behind and entered an offensive world about which the audience expected. It was not merely a matter of optics. Cosby treated it as a moral breach. To him, Denise Huxtable was a role model, a messenger to a certain kind of young womanhood, and anything that muddied that symbol threatened the show. To him, Bonet's choices off-screen mattered as much as Denise's actions on-screen. All this created the years of tension between mentor and protégé. But for Bonet, it felt like an intensely personal decision. She wanted to grow. She wanted to step out of the box of being America's daughter and demonstrate that she could tackle complicated adult roles. Angel Heart was not an act of rebellion. It was their ambition. She defended her choice in public, arguing that it was about work and not about scandal. In the meantime, however, the chasm between her and Cosby had opened up wide, and this illustrated two contrasting ideas on how a career should go. One saw the career in terms of control and brand loyalty, the other in terms of exploration and independence. Compromise in that clash was all but impossible. Thus, a spin-off was the solution. A different world was to take Denise into a new realm entirely. Student life at Hillman, a historically black college. It seemed, on the face of it, the perfect solution. Bonet could carry the lead in her own show, still part of the Huxtable universe, but away from the distraction on the main set. For Cosby, That decision would keep Denise in the family, but would not disrupt the flagship series. And eventually, it became Bonet's turn to shine as the lead in a new story. A win-win. Only the persistent, insidious conflict was there. Bonet was for authenticity and growth, while the brand stood for control. What followed proved the spin-off wasn't an escape. It was just a different venue for the same fight. Critics claimed that the first season was flat, overly polished, and safe. It was almost like the Cosby Show that had migrated to a dorm. Then came Debbie Allen, who took over as showrunner in the second season. She brought in real-life issues, racism, activism, relationships, etc., which gave the series its bite. By then, Bonet was having to make yet another life decision that would once again throw her into conflict with the brand. A new creative boss would sharpen the show's realism, but Bonet's real-life news would collide with the brand line again. The pregnancy line. The spin-off seemed like a safety valve, but Lisa Bonet's personal life soon created a new crossroad that the brand was not ready to handle. In 1987, at just 19, Bonet eloped with musician Lenny Kravitz, and soon after, she became pregnant with their daughter, Zoe. For Bonet, this was not a scandal. It was life. She was starting a family, one filled with love and independence. But for the showrunners and Bill Cosby, the pregnancy presented a problem they could not easily spin away. If Denise Huxtable, the wide-eyed college freshman, were suddenly written as a single, unwed mother, it would disrupt the very values the show had built itself on. Behind the scenes, discussions were held about whether to fold Bonet's real pregnancy into a different world. It could have been a groundbreaking storyline, one that reflected the real challenges many young women faced, especially at college. In fact, Debbie Allen, who had stepped in to steer the series toward more authentic and socially relevant plots, was reportedly open to it. A story about Denise balancing motherhood and education could have been powerful, timely, and deeply human. But Cosby was immovable. To him, Denise was not the vehicle for such a storyline. He believed showing her as an unwed mother would send the wrong message to the young audience who looked to her as a role model. The pregnancy plotline was firmly rejected. That choice clinched Bonet's first major break from the Cosby universe. Denise Huxtable was written out at the end of the first season of A Different World, supposedly because she had dropped out of college. The press release stated that the official reason was creative differences, code for the personal and moral clashes within the show. Simply put, the writers and producers were caught between preserving authenticity and protecting the brand. Bonet's real life did not measure up to the fictional norm, and she would be pushed out of the show. Somehow, within this time span of mere months, she had gone from star of 2 shows to unemployed. Yet the Cosby brand was not quite finished with her. By 1989, in the 6th season of The Cosby Show, Bonet returned to the main cast. However, this time the writers have created a backstory that would allow Denise to rejoin the Huxtables without disturbing the family-friendly tone. Denise had gone off to Africa, married a naval officer, Martin Kendall, and in the meantime had become a stepmother to his daughter Olivia, played by Raven Simone. This story served 2 purposes. It made the return of Bonet feel organic, and it brought a new young child who could inject energy into the household, just as Rudy did in earlier seasons. Ratings skyrocketed, and for a moment, a truce appeared to have been reached. But there was an old friction that never went away. Bonet has been said to arrive late, not very enthusiastic about the material, and growing out of sync with how the show's patriarch saw the vision. The brooding atmosphere was obvious, and so, in Season 7, it was decided. Lisa Bonet was out forever. Denise was scrapped this time without so much as a spin-off or a gentle landing. The tale had it that she was to be in Asia with her husband, essentially getting her out of the plot. By the time of the last season, she had become only a name mentioned occasionally, but was never seen again. This long-running saga, initial departure, spin-off, forced exit, return, and final dismissal, was not just a case of creative differences, but a process of emancipation of a young woman from a shadow cast by a much larger brand than herself. Bonet, for her part, wanted to evolve as an artist and as a person. But the very nature of the show required her to stay frozen, ad infinitum, as Denise, a model daughter who never strayed too far from perfection. The point of no return was by now too far from the two realities. Not just a pregnancy, late arrival, or offenses due to an ambiguous film role signaled her exit. It was tied to autonomy. Bonet wanted control over her choices, and the show wanted control over its image. Neither could bend so much as a crack to meet somewhere in the center. In the end, though, Denise Huxtable exited the living room as suddenly as she had once brightened it, and her departure became the clearest sign yet that the perfect sitcom family was never quite as perfect as it seemed. Another cast member entered with hope and discipline, only to meet a different kind of wall. Joseph C. Phillips. When Joseph C. Phillips joined The Cosby Show in Season 6, it looked like a golden opportunity. As Lieutenant Martin Kendall, he was written in as Denise Huxtable's husband and the father of young Olivia. On paper, the role was promising. A stable military man whose presence balanced Denise's free-spirited nature. He represented order and responsibility, the kind of character that fit neatly into the Huxtable household dynamic. To viewers, Martin was a fresh addition that expanded the family tree. For Phillips himself, it was a dream come true. He was working alongside a trailblazer he admired and stepping into one of the most successful shows on television. But admiration can quickly turn into disillusionment. Phillips has since been candid about how his time on set unfolded, describing it as one of the most difficult experiences of his career. His main challenge was the tension between the two people he worked with most closely, Lisa Bonet and Bill Cosby. With Bonet, the chemistry never matched what was expected on screen. He recalled that she often arrived late, unprepared, or visibly disengaged. For an actor whose character was built around a loving marriage, that lack of connection made scenes difficult. What should have felt like a believable partnership instead became strained, with Phillips left trying to bridge a gap that seemed to widen with every taping. If working amid Bonet proved to be frustrating, working with Cosby would be more intimidating for Phillips. If Phillips entered a show filled with reverence for Cosby, he would end up seeing his idol as a pioneer, setting the stage for black actors to make a place in television. However, that reverence soon met reality behind the curtain. Phillips has described Cosby to be a whip-cracking person who would lose his temper in public. He narrated how he was blasted among the cast, crew, and even a live studio audience for delivering lines not acknowledged by Cosby. For him, that moment made him feel humiliated, walking on eggshells and wondering when the next eruption would happen. For a young actor trying to make a name for himself, it was a painful insight into the power imbalance on set. The strain only deepened as Bonet's role diminished and eventually disappeared. So he had lost Denise, and now Martin Kendall loses his overnight narrative anchor. Events were getting less frequent, usually explained away by some really lazy plot device such as a naval deployment. Olivia was still there, seamlessly blending into the Huxtables, while Martin faded into the background. By the show's last season, Phillips was nearly invisible. What had been exciting opportunism now bore the reminder of how quickly a character could be thrown aside when the larger story no longer needed him. It is a relief to Phillips that his show has finally seen the end of its road. The once dream job had turned into an everyday cause of stress, disappointment, and disillusionment. This story puts his into a further dimension of the larger picture of The Cosby Show. Some actors openly clashed over issues of personal choice, while others suffered quietly in an environment that expected loyalty and obedience above all other things. Phillips has come out with hard-learned lessons on respect and power, and the distance between the myth of the perfect sitcom family and the reality underneath it. Not every exit was explosive. Some characters simply drifted to the edges, and that matters too. Sabrina Lebeauf. Not every departure from The Cosby Show carried the sting of confrontation. Some were quieter, slower, and shaped more by creative drift than conflict. Sabrina Lebeauf's story is one of those cases. Cast as Sandra Huxtable, the eldest daughter, she brought poise, maturity, and a sense of calm to the Huxtable household. Yet, despite being a core part of the family, Sandra's presence always felt slightly different from her siblings. She lived on the periphery of the show, appearing in bursts, then fading into the background. Her storyline often tethered more to circumstance than design. From the start, Lebeauf's casting came with questions. At 26, she was only a decade younger than Phylicia Rashad, who played her mother. Cosby himself reportedly doubted the match, worried that she might not look young enough for the part. But casting directors pushed for her, convinced that Lebeauf's elegance and intelligence would make her a believable Princeton graduate and the Huxtables' proud firstborn. They were right. When Sandra appeared, she radiated credibility. She was the daughter who had made it, the academic success story parents could boast about. Yet that very success often pulled her away from the family's central rhythm. Sandra's life was so linear. She went to college and was married, and then came twins, which quickly threw her into adulthood. The humor and heart of the series lie in Cliff and Claire rearing children still under their roof, and Sandra's independence lessened her narrative gravity. By the time she married Elvin Thibodeau, much of her arc was concerning adult stuff, the navigations of married life, gender roles, or household management. These themes were salient, but they didn't have the kind of breezy humor that Theo's school struggles possessed, or that Rudy's childlike perspective could offer. For the Cosbys, issues of adulthood didn't provide the same power to comical narratives carved by fatherly advice and parental direction. The shift of focus would return to the younger kids and eventually introduce Olivia, who rejuvenated the dynamic with humor centered on children. However, Lebeauf never spoke in public about spite or about a feud. She kept her professional manners, rejoiced when she was called upon to participate in reunions, and otherwise lived her life. But her path suggests something much deeper. They want sitcom storytelling to be very tight in a little circle, and if a character grows beyond it, he can fade into the sidelines. Sandra had developed into a well-raised daughter, raised well. Her arc would be in a show that takes process input but does not allow her narrative energy to go elsewhere now. After the show, Lebeauf did not go chasing after the celebrity world of today, as does everyone else. Rather, she went back to her first theater love, which has now culminated in a great stage career, notably in the Shakespeare Theater Company, Washington, D.C. The inertia only served to reveal where her artistic interests really were. Sitcom fame for Lebeauf was merely one chapter in a book, not necessarily the whole one. Another supporting face stayed loyal, then faced the industry afterglow in a very public way. Jeffrey Owens. Jeffrey Owens stepped into The Cosby Show as Elvin Thibodeau, Sandra Huxtable's sometimes clueless, often charming boyfriend turned husband. At first, he was written as a foil, chauvinistic, traditional, and locked in constant debates with Claire Huxtable about gender roles. Those sparring matches gave the show sharp comedic moments, as Claire dismantled his old-fashioned views with wit and fire. But as the series progressed, Elvin softened. Marriage, fatherhood, and immersion in the Huxtable family reshaped him into a warmer, more open-minded man. Owens delivered this evolution with a steady comedic touch, ensuring Elvin's place in the show's heart even if he was never the central focus. Unlike Lisa Bonet or Joseph C. Phillips, Owens never clashed openly with the hierarchy of the set. He remained a reliable supporting presence until the very end, his character woven naturally into Sandra's arc. But what happened after the cameras stopped rolling reveals another truth about the legacy of The Cosby Show. The shadow of a massive hit can linger long after the applause fades. For Owens, the challenge wasn't leaving the show, it was what came next. In the year 2018, decades after the end of the series, Owens unwittingly became the subject of amazement in the media. A photo of him at work in a Trader Joe's grocery store in New Jersey had surfaced. The image extraordinarily spread their nets online with sensational headlines that implied that a once famous actor was falling into obscurity. There was a brief spell of such familiar stories making in Hollywood's cruel game of fame and decline. Then began something remarkable. At this point, the public moved. Viewers, fans, and other actors stood with Owens, commending pure honesty between acting jobs. His dignity and work ethic became the story instead of pity or shame. Owens gracefully handled the frenzy himself. A retail job allowed him to keep auditioning and still acting when asked in interviews about this. Unpredictably, he described the life of a working actor for someone who used to be in a famous show. Real talk about finances in acting, what it means to be famous, and why it doesn't translate into lifelong security for everyone. For every megastar who becomes wealthy, there are countless actors who must balance passion with practicality. It reminded the American public that real work isn't a fall, it's survival. And it's honorable. This is ironic because that went viral originally with a view to shaming him, but now it has revived his career again. There began to flow in offers. Tyler Perry came out publicly, cast him in a new project, and the opportunities continued to come in, proving that resilience and integrity could turn into a second act, even in the most uncomfortable spotlight. Owen, however, absorbed the outsized wave not as a comeback, but as a resumption of what he has always been, a working actor for whom the job titles do not matter. It is a long shadow cast by The Cosby Show, now tracing his journey. 8 seasons, a juggernaut in cultures. And then the show finished. But the reality is just the same for him, as with many actors emerging from hit series, molded, few choices, and how one would struggle to escape from the mind of the audience, which pigeonholed him into a mythic persona. Unlike Bonet, who used outrageous artistic choices as an escape, or Phillips, who rejigged ways out of utter disillusionment, Owens often neared his attachment to Elvin without proclaiming. Stack these stories side by side, and a bigger pattern appears. One that explains every arrival and exit. Power, PR, and fallout. Step back, and the picture sharpens. Each departure, each quiet fade, and each post-show struggle is not an isolated story. It is part of a pattern. The Cosby Show was built around one central force: Bill Cosby. He was not only the star, but also the architect of its image. Every character, every storyline, even off-screen choices by the actors, orbited around his vision. That vision was simple but strict. The Huxtables had to represent an idealized family, unshaken by real-life messiness. When reality crept in, whether through Lisa Bonet's daring film role, her pregnancy, Joseph C. Phillips' frustrations, or Sabrina Lebeauf's natural drift, the solution was always the same: protect the brand first. The stress has never been visible to the public because public relations has always had everything clean. Creative differences, natural story evolution. Such explanations were serious and harmless to hear. They sounded logical. But such terms masked discontent, humiliation, and curvy careers against the will of actors. Cosby owned the yard in the scene, so that loyalty was expected while dissent was dear. For some, like Bonet, independence in the arts was no longer reconcilable with the job. For others, like Phillips, dreams of working alongside a hero dissolved under the heavy weight of control and public scolding. And for Lebeauf, the lights faded not because of scandal, but because the product had little use for stories for grown-ups that did not uphold Cosby's daddyhood. There are those who remained, Jeffrey Owens only one among them, who have known the very long effects of the machine. Fame from The Cosby Show has truly been a blessing and a curse. It helped garner some recognition while becoming a reminder for later limited roles. When you are part of something so big, you may never actually step out of its shadow completely. Owens's viral moment decades later showed the world how fast a cultural icon could end up only as a headline on falling from grace, until he reframed the narrative himself with dignity and resilience. What knits all this together is not just the control of one man, but the myth that the show itself sold to America. A picture of a family that was presented to be a model one, which should not have fallen into chaos, failure, or imperfection. But actors are people. They grow, they clash, they make decisions that cannot be folded into a tidy narrative. And when it happened, the show did not embrace complexity. It simply erased or rewrote it. The sweater is still neat, but underneath it, the seams strain against the pull. The consequences of these departures are now visible in retrospect. Bonet's and Phillips's departures highlighted the cost of tying art to image management. Their stories prove that the perfect family on screen came at the cost of real lives behind the camera. One would assume viewers tuned in for laughter and learning, while the actors endured the burden of keeping up the illusion. When that illusion was shattered by their escape, the retaliation was quick. Careers stalled, reputations were reshaped, and the industry sent a clear warning to anyone who dared step out of line. What should have been a celebration of individuality turned into a cautionary tale for others in the cast. In many ways, their exits revealed more about the machine behind the show than the characters themselves ever could. If this pulled back the curtain, like, comment, and subscribe. Tell us which chapter shocked you most and what show you want investigated next. And keep watching the next video on your screen. We dig into how image control shaped another beloved series and the careers it touched.